And today's passage is brought to us from chapter 4. It's item 5 on the Gospel according to Spiritism, which is this wonderful, marvelous book, which is filled with wonderful teachings and wonderful elucidations on the messages from the Gospel of Christ. And I encourage each and every one of you to read it and study it because they're so important, so nourishing to the soul. And today's passage is from John 3, 1 through 12. I only put a small one here because this is a rather long passage. And this passage is when Jesus went to speak with Nicodemus. And we find in the beginning of the passage the following. Now there was a man among the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a senator of the Jews. Nicodemus was a member of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the assembly of the Jews in Israel at the time, who went at night to meet Jesus and said to him, Rabbi, we know you have come from God to instruct us as a doctor, for no one could perform the miracles you are doing if God were not with him. And Jesus answered, Verily, verily, I say to you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless he is born again. And that's John 3:5. In this passage, everything from Jesus is a treasure trove. Because once we get the key to open this treasure trove, we find within it so much wealth and so many riches. Because in this small passage, we find three principles being established that are in accordance with the Spiritist teachings from the Spiritst Doctrine. The first one we find here is the principle of reincarnation. Because here we find no one can see the kingdom of God unless he is born again. It is a necessary condition for us to be born again, over and over again in successive existences, as we learn to coexist with one another, as we go through the trials and obstacles of life, so we can overcome them and perhaps come back in a better situation so that we may continue further in this advancement. And then the passage continues. Nicodemus said to him, How can a man who is already old be born? Can he enter his mother's womb in order to be born a second time? Here we find a man who was in the Senate, a man of supposed intelligence, asking what to us is an elementary question that science has already proven wrong a long time ago. No one can go back into a body that has already deceased because that body is going to be biologically dispersed and reabsorbed back into the earth. There's no way that anyone could go back into another body, much less go back into the womb of their own mother or of another woman. It's a ridiculous notion, but either way, this is the question posed to Jesus. And then Jesus responds, Verily, verily, I say to you, if a man is not born again of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. And here we find the second principle, the principle of matter and the principle of the Spirit, which is going to be in the next sentence, which says, Whatever is born from flesh is flesh, and whatever is born from the Spirit is spirit. In other words, what is born from the body is only matter, inert matter with no intelligence. We find many births of kids that have no life. It is just the body, it is just the flesh. But the Spirit, however, animates that body, and that's why we are here. We are the spirits animating these bodies. And here we find a difference, a separation between spirit and matter. And why does he use water? Because back then, water was recognized as a generative element, an element of creation, a principle of creation, because you had the two waters and the earth, which found itself between the two waters. And this passage is obviously found in Genesis, where it says, The Spirit of God hovered over the waters. It hovered over the surface of the waters. Let there be a firmament or a sky in the midst of the waters. Let the waters that are under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry element appear. Let the waters produce, here we find the production, living animals that swim in the water, and birds that fly above the earth and under the firmament. So here was Jesus only using what was known back then to describe the notion of what he was about to explain, or what he was explaining. And then moving on, he says, the Spirit blows, whatever is born from the flesh is flesh, and whatever is born from the Spirit is spirit. So here's the second principle of spirit and matter and separating both. Do not be surprised that I have said to you that it is necessary. So here he is once again emphasizing it is necessary for you to be born again. The Spirit blows wherever it wishes, and you hear its voice. Now here we can think of God or our own spirit, our individual spirit. But you do not know where it comes from or where it is going. And here we find a third principle, which is the plurality of existences. Because when he says the Spirit blows wherever it wishes, and you hear its voice, but you do not know where it comes from or where it is going, that means that we do not know what our last existence was. We do not know what someone else's last existence was, nor do we know what our next existence will be, much less what someone else's existence will be in the future. So this is what Jesus is explaining here. So we find the wealth of these three principles in this small passage. And he finalizes by saying, the same occurs with every man who is born of the Spirit. Every man, because we are all a spirit incarnated into a human body. And this is the essence of this passage. And that's why I always say it's so important to read them, because Jesus was obviously so far ahead of that era that even today a lot of us can't comprehend these teachings. And they're so important because they establish the base where we find the eternal truths, the truths that we are here to learn, that we are here to grow, as I had said, that we are here to advance, so that perhaps our spirit may find itself in a next existence in a better place, perhaps better than earth. We don't know. But let's work hard in order to attain that and achieve that goal and love one another as Jesus loved us, and let's love God as well. So thank you very much, and this is today's Gospel Moment.